Right now in 2025, it is probably more important than ever, at least since around 2008 when we had the great financial crisis, for people to know how much money they have, where it's all going right now, because too many people are having financial troubles and a lot of it could be avoided. And that's why I want to go over 10 of the craziest money stats of the average person right now. Because when you take a look at all this stuff, it becomes very clear that people could be doing a better job and could be more responsible with their money. And since my goal on this channel is always to help educate and inform and give people a leg up, I thought it would be important to go over some of this information. We're going to talk about credit cards, we're going to talk about housing, we're going to talk about investing, all sorts of things like that. But let's start with your car, because that's something that basically everybody needs unless you live in a super walkable city or where their public transportation is fantastic. Most people need to have a car, but most people do not need to have the car that they actually drive. Right now, the car stats are pretty horrific because about a quarter of the people who are trading in a car right now are underwater on their loan. You guys have heard me talk about this recently, but it is truly a big problem because that means you owe more on the car than it's actually worth. And when you want to go trade it in, it means you most likely are going to have to get an even larger loan than necessary just because you're underwater on that loan. Here's an example of how this can look for you in real life. If you've got a car that's worth $10,000 when you go to trade it in, but you still owe $16,500, well, that extra $6,500 doesn't disappear when you trade it in. That gets rolled into your next loan if you qualify. That's the other big asterisk to this, if you qualify. And that's why a lot of people right now are stretched into 84-month or even 96-month car loans. That's basically a car mortgage, guys. It's not a car payment, it's a car mortgage. You're constantly going to be trapped in this debt cycle of having these massive car payments. You know, a 96-month car loan is 8 years. Not so long ago, it was already a stretch for people to get a 5-year car loan. And now we're up to 8 years. And obviously the problem is a ton of people paid way too much money for cars during the pandemic. And already before the pandemic, if you were to buy a brand new car, the value plummets the moment you drive it off the lot. But that has been exacerbated in recent times because people paid above asking price for these cars, kind of like the housing market. So what can you do to avoid ending up in this trap? Well, you have to buy used, guys, and you can't buy with your ego. You can let someone else get the first 3 to 5 years of major depreciation on the car, and then you get the same car once it's worth half of what the original person paid for it. And the other thing is, you have to stop caring what other people think about what you drive. The reality is, nobody cares. If you are trying to put up a front or have a certain car because you think it's some kind of financial flex, trust me, it's not. Most people really don't care, and the ones that do, you probably don't want to have anything to do with anyways. And the other thing is, if you're going to finance, which I recommend you don't, you should always be able to pay cash for the car that you're purchasing. But if you have to get a car loan, keep the payments small. Put at least 20% down, and the maximum car loan you should be having is 5 years. But really, a 3-year loan would be much better. If you have to stretch it to 5 years, there's a good chance you really can't afford that car. But if it keeps the payments in a very low, affordable range for you, then it might be worth it. Your car payment really shouldn't be more than 10% of your take-home pay. And once it starts creeping into the 20 to 30% range, I mean, that's what you should be spending on your house payment, guys, your rent payment. But people are spending this regularly on their car. And today I'm walking down Flamingo Place and Flamingo Drive in South Beach. Now the second thing is buy now, pay later. This is something that has really taken off in recent years. And you know, it's such a big problem because it makes it so easy to just split whatever you're buying into 4 easy payments, right? Interest free. They make it sound like nothing's going to happen. You're going to buy something, you're not going to pay any interest, even though you can't afford it right now. This is a great deal. But the truth is, buy now, pay later is just debt with better branding, okay? The average buy now, pay later user is carrying a few $100s worth of debt in the form of those loans. And a lot of people are starting to miss those payments and getting hit with fees. And it's no longer free to use it then. And the issue with it is buy now, pay later for a lot of people doesn't feel like debt because you don't pay any interest as long as you pay it on time. And now even a lot of six-figure earners have been using buy now, pay later. It's not just broke people who are doing this. This is spreading into all sectors of the economy, people who are trying to live above their means and a lifestyle they cannot afford. Because what buy now, pay later does is it kind of tricks you into thinking, well, if I can afford 25% of this item right now, then I can afford it. But if you can't buy something outright in cash, not saying you have to use cash, but I'm saying you have to have the money in your bank account, then there's no reason you should be buying it. You should be saving up. That's what discipline is about. That's how people get ahead financially. When you want to buy a house, you have to save up for the down payment. You have to save up to put a new roof on the house. You have to do things like that. But too many people turn to debt and the easy way out, 0% down for things, or very low money down options like FHA when it comes to buying a house. And all this just gets people into big trouble because they end up with too much debt that they just can't afford to pay back. And the reality is, interest free doesn't mean that it's penalty free with buy now, pay later. Missing a payment means you are going to pay more than you borrowed. That's the bottom line. Same thing as interest. In my opinion, buy now, pay later is kind of a useless financial tool because if you can't afford to pay for something in full right now, then you really shouldn't be buying it. And so what's the point of using buy now, pay later? It does nothing but get people in trouble and cause them to take on even more debt on top of the credit card debt they're already carrying. Now, the third money stat is kind of interesting and something you might not have thought of. And that is, there are trillions of dollars actually sitting in bank accounts right now, basically earning no interest and not bringing any return on investment for people. And this is a big problem, especially with older people, I notice. Like, older people, they want to stick with the traditional banks, you know, the brick and mortar banks like Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Chase Bank, all the ones that have physical locations still. But you know, the problem with those banks, for the most part, is they don't pay you any interest on your money. So if you have savings, you're getting essentially nothing for it. You know, if you got $5,000 sitting in one of those savings accounts that's only earning 0.4% interest, and some of them are even lower than that, you know, you're making $20 a year on that money. Inflation is absolutely robbing you at that point, and you're losing money by the month. But at least if you were to open up an online high yield savings account, that $5,000 would now net you over $150 a year, assuming you're earning between 3 and 4% interest on that money. That's just like a simple transition people can make. You're doing absolutely nothing different besides switching financial institutions to earn a little extra money in interest. And with how hard up everybody is for cash these days, that seems like a no-brainer. This is especially something people should be doing with their emergency fund. You know, any type of money you're keeping on the side, put it in a high yield savings account, guys. It's not hard to do. It's 100% free. There's plenty of options out there. There's absolutely no reason in 2025 that anybody, and I mean anybody, regardless of your age, should be keeping anything more than a couple $1,000s in an account that's not yielding you at least 3 to 4% right now in 2025. Now, this fourth stat is probably one of the scariest ones, which is still kind of hard to believe, but it is the reality, which is that most Americans cannot afford a $1,000 surprise expense. About 60% of Americans, in fact, cannot afford that $1,000 emergency. And let's face it, in 2025 and how much inflation we have been facing, $1,000 is really nothing anymore. You know, that can just be a simple and minor car repair at this point, or your air conditioner dies in your house, or even a trip to the emergency room or the urgent care, especially if you don't have insurance. And what do people do? Well, they don't have the money, so they have to put on the credit card. They have to get a personal loan. They have to borrow money from friends or family, all things that could be avoided. And this is especially true with younger folks, guys, so listen up if you are under 30 years old, because a big chunk of Gen Zers do not have any emergency savings at all. And a lot of millennials and even Gen Xers only have a tiny cushion at that. A lot of people in this age range have nowhere near 3 months of expenses. And let's face it, 3 months of expenses in 2025 is also nothing. I recommend 6 to 12 months. You guys have heard all the layoff stories I've gone over with you this year. And there have been so many people who have been out of work for well over a year. and have had to dig into all of their emergency savings and then some and still end up in debt, even if they did all this stuff right, because it takes so long to get a new job now. And that's why building your emergency fund should always be your number one financial goal. If you're starting from zero, assuming you have no debt, you should be putting money away for an emergency fund. If you have credit card debt or buy now, pay later debt, first you need to pay that stuff off and then start saving for your emergency fund. But an easy way to do this is just to put a little bit aside every single paycheck. You know, put $100 away in your high yield savings account every single time you get a check. And then if you get paid bi-weekly, within just a few months, you're going to have over $1,000. And also, let's face it, like, people don't really prioritize what emergencies mean sometimes. Like, if your TV dies, does that constitute digging into the emergency fund? Probably not. But if you have car trouble and you need to get a repair and your car is your lifeline to get to and from work, that probably is an emergency. So you have to exercise some common sense here on what's truly an emergency and what isn't. Now, number 5, let's talk about people's personal savings rates. You know, the median bank account balance in the US is in the low single-digit thousands, meaning that most people have anywhere between probably $3,000 and $8,000 sitting in the bank. But obviously, that's just the median, and that number can vary tremendously based on someone's age, income levels, financial savviness, etc. Somebody making $160,000 a year, for example, shouldn't be comparing themselves to somebody making 50 grand a year with how much savings you have in the bank. And if you do make that 160 grand a year, but you only have like 10 grand saved up as an emergency fund, well, that puts you way behind people in your income group. I think instead of people doing the bare minimum when it comes to finances and savings and getting ahead, everybody should be looking to be 1 or 2 steps ahead of their financial step on the ladder. Like, for example, if you're somebody who makes 50 grand a year and you manage to put 20 grand away, that's earning you like $1,000 or more in interest right now per year, that's a win, guys. That's way further ahead than most people making that kind of money. And ultimately, those are the types of things you can do in behavior that lead people to have the opportunity to jump income brackets in order to jump ahead of most people who are making that kind of income. And I've told people on this channel for a long time now that you should have multiple streams of income. 2 or more is ideal. And if you're making an extra $500 or $600 a month beyond what you need each month to survive and pay your bills, all of that money should be saved and invested. And before you know it, after a few years' time, you are going to have a healthy nest egg and even be able to have an investment account, retirement accounts. Your money's going to be working for you and for your future, and that will help you get so much further ahead of the average person financially. But that kind of leads me right into the next point, which is number 6 here, because people put their money into retirement accounts, but then they kind of forget to invest it sometimes. You know, like, it's not just a one and done thing. When you put your money away into retirement accounts, you still have some level of involvement if you want that money to grow over the years for you. If you just put it in your investment account and it just sits in cash, it's probably not doing much for you. Unless it's in a regular brokerage account, like I use Vanguard, and they put you in short-term treasuries when your money's just sitting in cash, so it's still earning about a 4% rate, about what you would get at a high-yield savings account, even when it's not invested. So if you're doing something like that, that's probably okay, but just putting it in your retirement account and it's doing nothing until you invest it, that's no good. And this can happen to a lot of people that don't know much about retirement accounts, because let's say that money comes automatically out of your paycheck from your job and it goes into your retirement account, but you never pick any investments, well, you're not earning anything. Or if you were to roll a 401k into an IRA, then the investments get liquidated during the transfer and the money stays as cash in the account until you tell them to do something otherwise with it. So what everybody needs to do, if you have an IRA, a 401k, anything like that, look at how much money's in there and where is it sitting. Is it sitting in index funds? Is it sitting in ETFs? Is it sitting in bonds? Or is it just sitting in the cash or settlement fund? Never assume that your brokerage account is doing any of this stuff for you. Always assume that you're going to have to take some responsibility and do some of this stuff yourself. And number 7 is, if you are going to invest in the stock market for retirement or just on the side as a regular brokerage account, whatever you decide to do, you really have to take a long-term mindset with it, because the stock market can have some really bad years. This year is kind of turning out to be one of them. Not the greatest year, that's for sure. You know, there's years where the market can drop 10 or 20% and it can be an all-out crash. But a lot of people panic, they start pulling their money out, and they get pennies on the dollar for what they have invested in there, and they end up getting slaughtered. But the trick is, you have to stick with it, especially if you are younger and you have time to kill. You know, if you're somebody who's already retired and you're worried about all your retirement savings disappearing, that's a different story. But for anybody who's still working towards retirement and saving and investing for their future, you have to stick with those big downturns. Because people who are patient and stick with it for the long term are the ones who end up winning in the end. So if you're somebody who does have an investment account of any kind, whether it's a retirement account, a regular brokerage account, whatever it is, you have to go into it with the long-term mentality and mindset that you're going to be doing this for 20 or 30 years before you even think about taking any money out. You know, one thing a lot of people are doing right now, because they're getting desperate for cash, is they borrow against their retirement savings, or they just make early withdrawals and take the penalties. This is one of the worst things that you can do for your future. And if you do have to do something like that, it means you're not doing enough to stay prepared financially. It means you're not making enough income. It means you're spending too much money. And one of the best strategies over the long run is doing dollar cost averaging, which is where every month, let's say you invest $500 a month consistently for 30 years. So that way you're buying when the market's good, you're buying when it's bad, you're buying when it's flat. And over those years, that dollar cost averaging tends to give you the best return. I'm not an expert on this stuff, but that's just what has worked historically. Now, the 8th crazy money stat is something we talk about a lot here on the channel, and that is how homeownership is getting pushed later and later into life. I just went over with you guys a couple weeks ago that the average first-time home buyer today has now reached 40 years old, which is kind of ridiculous. And just 20 years ago, you know, it was people in their late 20s or early 30s who were buying homes. Home prices have surpassed wages tremendously over the past 5 years, and people are sitting down and doing the math today, and a lot of them are realizing that renting plus investing is actually a much smarter long-term strategy right now. Like if you're looking at a $3,000 mortgage payment or $1,500 a month in rent, and you decide to rent, but you pretend like you bought, and you take that extra $1,500 a month and invest it for the long term, like we were just talking about, you will be rich one day. That is a guaranteed fact. And some people, when they sit down and look at that and they realize it, it's a no-brainer to take that decision rather than to become a homeowner. You're stuck with this huge monthly payment, and that's not all of it, by the way, because when you're a homeowner, there are tons of surprise expenses. We just talked about a few days ago how Zillow's most recent number says that you're going to be paying upwards of over $16,000 a year or more, depending on where you live, in addition to your mortgage payments, just from all the ancillary expenses, guys. So here's what you have to do, okay? Don't buy a house just because everybody told you that's what you need to do. Renting is a waste of money, blah, 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 all those old boomer terms that are no longer relevant. I'm not saying that buying a house is never a good idea or that no one should buy. I'm just saying that if you haven't run the numbers, you might be surprised on where you stand with it. And if you do buy, make sure that the cost difference between renting is not that great and you plan on staying in the house for 7 to 10 years. Because in this market right now, it's going to take you at least that long to see any noticeable appreciation and make it worth it. If you need to sell before that, there's a good chance you could be underwater on your mortgage like so many people are right now. And probably the most important thing that you can do is look beyond just the monthly payment difference. Like I said, if buying the house is $3,000 a month, but renting is $2,700, you might say, well, for that extra $300 a month, it makes more sense to become the homeowner. However, don't forget about insurance. Don't forget about the surprise expenses. Don't forget about all the extra things you're going to have to pay for. You know, if you're buying a house that costs you around $3,000 a month, you're probably buying in the median home price range, $400,000 to $450,000. And guess what? Surprise expenses can run you about 1% of that home's value per year. So you better be ready to spend $4 to $5 grand a year easily on any surprise expenses, which is in addition to that $300 a month extra you're taking on. So it ends up being double that. You're really taking on an extra $600 a month when you average those costs throughout the year. So don't be fooled just by the payment alone. You know, owning a home definitely has its benefits, guys. I'm not going to go over all of them in this video, but it can also be a very expensive trap if you're not really looking at the full cost of it. Now, the ninth money stat is everybody wants to be rich, but nobody really wants to form the financial discipline and implement the money habits that get people there, okay? To land in the top 10% of American households by net worth in this country, you need to have at least over $1 million in assets, which is your home equity, your retirement accounts, your cash, minus all of your debts. So essentially, you have to be a millionaire on paper in order to be able to be in the top 10% of earners in this country. And how do you get there? Well, it's all the things I talk about on this channel. It's spending far below your means for a very long time, saving a lot more of your income than the average person, and preferably investing a lot of it, kind of like that rent versus buy scenario we just talked about. And also investing consistently over the years, not just when it feels convenient or when it feels like you have a little extra money. And avoiding big wealth draining mistakes like massive car loans that so many people are into. You know, lifestyle creep. Every time you earn more money, you spend even more. And of course, getting into all kinds of debt. Stay out of it. I'm not saying debt can't be used as a useful tool when it comes to investing in real estate, for example, or being leveraged on the right investments, but that takes a lot of skill, and it's a risk that people shouldn't take unless they can afford to lose money. So don't sit there and cry that you're broke and cry that you don't have anything if you're not working towards these big financial goals. I'm not saying you have to be a top 10%er. I'm just saying that if you are crying that you're broke and you have nothing, you need to do something about it in order to change that. If you're just going to sit there and keep spending like an idiot and going into debt every month over frivolous purchases, then you're getting what you deserve. Now, the last and 10th thing is that your savings rate beats out fancy returns when you're just starting out with your money journey. Here's what I mean, for example. If you have two people that earn $100,000 per year, and one person saves 10% of their income and earns a boring 1% return, but the other person saves 5% of their income but somehow earns a 10% return, who gets to $100,000 in savings faster? It's actually the first person who's saving a larger percentage of their income. And why is that? So the reason why the first person ends up ahead of the second person is because they're taking less risk, but they're building better financial habits in the long run that allow them to continue saving more and a larger percentage of their income over the long run. And let's face it, guys, even most people are not saving 10% of their income these days. That's just the truth. That's just too tall of an order for a lot of people. Going back to a point I made in this video, if 60% of people can't afford a $1,000 emergency, how on earth are they saving 10% of their income? Most are not. So even just doing that is putting you miles ahead of the average person. And that's why these money stats are so crazy, because it shows you how little people know about money and how much more you could actually be doing to put yourself 2 or 3 steps ahead right now. So if you enjoyed this video and it helped you in any way, please put a comment below about which one of these things or nuggets of wisdom you took away from it the most. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.